OK, máme za sebou 14. hodinu, už 20. minutu, trošku jsme naši krátkou přestávku přetáhli. Poprosil bych vás tedy, jestli byste se opět mohli usadit, protože už se nám blíží další přednáška. Tentokrát bude zahraniční řečník, a sice Billa Wirtze. Bill aktuálně působí jako Senior Policy Analyst v Consumer Choice Center, kde se snaží celkově posouvat témata obchodu a různých regulací takovým liberálnějším směrem. So, Bill, it's great to have you here. So, welcome, please, all welcome Bill Wirtz, who is going to talk. Okay. Yeah, is it working?
All right, that works. It works.
Great.
Perfect.
So, I heard that the European Union is trying to somehow fight nicotine products. Is that right?
Yeah, so we have sort of what you would call a creeping prohibition, where nicotine products, that's not just tobacco, that's also e-cigarettes, become increasingly more expensive and regulated.
Okay, so I hope you will tell us something more about it.
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely. Thank you. Dobrý den. Nevlomím česky, mluvíte anglicky? Yeah, you speak English? Sorry, that's as far as my Czech goes. But I hope I won't talk too fast. But still, I want to get us through this presentation quickly, because people only remember the first 20 minutes, so that's why I want to make this quick, so everybody remembers everything, and that you guys can have the next beer or the next coffee, whatever you are dependent on. Preventing the next prohibition, I will be in this talk mentioning both mouse, feces, and Osama bin Laden, so stick around for finding out how that all connects to each other. Let me find this clicker. There we go. So, anyone ever tried any of these? Show of hands, anyone ever tried? Yeah? Yeah, you shouldn't. It's bad for you. Really bad for you. Not good. If you haven't tried them, please don't start. That's my recommendation. It's not an order. I can't give you any orders. Don't start cigarettes. They're really bad for you. Bad for your health. We've known this for a while. Now, the government also knows this, and the government has been trying to get you to stop smoking with different methods. But first, let's get some perspective here, some of the numbers. So the Czech smoking rate is a bit over the EU average, about 18% there of adults who smoke somewhat regularly in the Czech Republic, or Czechia, depending on, I know Jan Mošovský will give me trouble for saying Czech Republic. The lowest smoking rate is in Sweden, it's about 5%. The highest is in Bulgaria, about 30%. The reason why Sweden is so low is not because they completely stopped nicotine products, but because Swedish people commonly use something called snus. You might be familiar with it. So snus is like a nicotine pouch you put under your lip, and that gives you a nicotine delivery of about 7 cigarettes. So if you try that, be careful with it. And that is why Sweden has a lower rate. Sweden, by the way, is the only country in the European Union where snus is legal. When Sweden joined the European Union in 1995, snus had already been banned, and Sweden required an exception to this ban in order to join the European Union. So, the government is trying all types of ways to get you to stop smoking, and it is a bit petty in the way it approaches that. So, bars, I think in the Czech Republic since 2018, you're not allowed to smoke inside anymore unless the place has a specific smoking area, or unless it's Usudu or any of those places where they just don't care, which of course also an option. Let's see if this works. Yeah, bus stops also actually in the Czech Republic, not allowed to smoke on those, even though I don't really see this very much enforced, but officially it's not legal to smoke on bus stops. And so, you know, if you just take the numbers for the UK, for instance, this is where the government tries to disincentivize you from smoking by increasing the price. So structurally, we've gone over from about £4 to £9. Now it's about £12 for a pack of cigarettes in the UK. So that is quite expensive, where we sort of introduce a quasi-prohibition in the same way that Lamborghinis are not illegal, but you can't really afford them. Now, cigarettes in production are not really expensive. The only real expense is the taxes that you pay on them, excise tax, value-added tax, where the government tries to levy extra taxes. And what does it do with that money? Well, on one hand, it tries to educate you not to buy the product that you just purchased, but it also funds everything from roads to law enforcement. I know there's somebody from police or law enforcement here. Part of your salary is also paid by paying taxes on cigarettes. Some countries also do some very silly things. So the French government proposed to ban cigarettes in movies. I don't know exactly how many French movies could still be produced if that was actually the law, but we'll probably eventually find out. Now, What does that have as an effect? It's hard to say how much of it is government effect and how much of it is actually people realizing that smoking is bad for you and giving it up. But this is sort of the projections that are done if you look at the most developed countries in the world. So we're about here somewhere, so we're still above 10%. EU average, as a reminder, 17% of adults who smoke cigarettes somewhat regularly. And we're going to see a decline. What is interesting, on the red line, you see women. It only started being acceptable socially for women to smoke about the 1960s. Previously, it was actually illegal for women to smoke in many places. In 1908, a woman in New York was arrested for smoking cigarettes in public because she was believed to be a prostitute, because only prostitutes smoked cigarettes. And then the tobacco industry said, look, we're losing about half of our potential customers, let's advertise towards women, and they did, and so women picked up smoking. The long filter, by the way, that you might have seen in movies, that was actually invented to make women seem more elegant when smoking cigarettes. So women consumption has picked up. In many countries in Europe, actually women smoke more. Depending on the age group, young girls smoke more cigarettes than boys. The average age in many EU countries to pick up smoking is about 13 and a half, so it's way too early and it's not good. But the government hasn't been really good at trying to prevent this in any way, shape, or form. And what we're going to see is that this rate will stabilize about 3-4% over the long term. So that's the amount of people that will never give up smoking, and there's really almost no way for the government to be able to achieve that because the demand stays regular. Even if you ban cigarettes, by the way, people still get their hands on it, and we will talk about how people do that. But the government, of course, even with just 3-4% in the faraway future, still is not happy. Cigarettes are not good for you. You should live longer to pay more tax. So it tries to get you to do that, tries to go quicker. So how do we reach this goal of people not smoking cigarettes, not consuming tobacco, or any nicotine products for that matter, quicker? And the government has some new ideas. And one of these ideas is generation ban. So what is a generation ban? Essentially, this means that anyone born after a certain year will not be allowed to purchase cigarettes or any nicotine products legally whatsoever. There's an ECI proposal in front of the European Union. So ECI, that's an European Citizens Initiative. Any of you can start an European Citizens Initiative. This was started by a Spanish public health non-profit, and they suggest that anyone born after the year 2010 is completely not allowed to purchase any nicotine products. Now, of course, the people born in 2010 now are 12 years old, and they're not allowed to do that anyway. However, eventually we'll get to a point where a 36-year-old will be legally allowed to purchase cigarettes under such a law, and a 35-year-old will not be allowed to purchase cigarettes, which all seems a bit strange. Not sure if that's legal under EU law, but we'll find out in case the ECI goes further into the proposal of the European Commission. And as a reminder, any EU law would also apply to the Czech Republic, equally to any other EU member state. Now, there are some countries that have tried to do this or are in the process of doing this already. And I'll give you some examples. So we have New Zealand. New Zealand has been talking about such a law for a while now, banning people after a certain age. Actually, New Zealand wants to put this age earlier, so this would apply to people who are already legally of age to purchase cigarettes now. Let's see, we have Malaysia. Malaysia actually was proposing this. They are calling it Generation Endgame, which sounds more like a science fiction movie, but whatever. So they are trying to ban people of a certain age group to also purchase cigarettes. The government just fell, so we'll see how that will develop in Malaysia. We have Hungary. Oh, wait. Hungary, sorry, it's really hard to know the difference these days. In Hungary, some legislators are proposing the same type of rule. Once again, the problem is that specific EU member states cannot necessarily change these rules because of EU laws, so Hungary might wait to have a proposal on an EU level be ready. So these are sort of the prime movers. Massachusetts in the US wants to do something similar. Of course, this is something that's much easier to do for islands because it's easier to control so the import and then also the retail licenses for individual businesses to do that. It's much harder when the next border is quite close and you can just drive across the border. I'm from a very small country called Luxembourg, and we have something called Jack Daniel's Bridge. If you're not familiar with it, in Luxembourg, the legal age to buy liquor is 16. So you can buy any amount of liquor you want at age 16. In Germany, it's 18 for liquor. So what the 16-year-olds on their birthday do, they walk across the bridge, they get as much Jack Daniels and vodka as they want, and they walk back. That's legal. and they can do that. Now, of course, that will be something that we experience quite a bit if we were to go for a generation ban. Let's see. All right, so why is this being suggested? Obviously, this is being suggested because smoking is bad for you. That's the inherent argument, and that is absolutely true. Smoking is bad for you. We know all the health consequences of smoking. Again, as a recommendation to you, don't pick up smoking if you're not smoking already. And if you're smoking, try and reduce it. Try and find ways to reduce your consumption. You'll thank yourself later. There's a good reason, again, not an order, because I can't order you anything, but it's a good recommendation from me to reduce your consumption as much as you can. And the other reason is because the government has been completely inept, incapable, because there's nothing really the government is really good at, apart from waging war and stealing from you. So the government has been really ineffective at curbing smoking, so it tries to go harder down on this by having a sort of a quasi-prohibition, a halfway through prohibition on nicotine products. Should this be implemented, and I always want to mention this first before I go into the arguments why we shouldn't do it on a practical level, there's, of course, fundamental ideological differences on the people who suggest this. My personal view is that we should have consumer choice, and consumers who know about the health consequences of their consumption should not be restricted in doing so, even though it is bad for them. It's not like driving too fast. You're harming nobody else but yourself, so therefore you should be allowed to do that. It's your body, it's your choice. However, the people in government have a fundamentally different understanding of individual choices of consumers, so therefore they are suggesting these type of rules. Does it work? So in order to question, that's where we get into the practicality of these kind of rules. Does it work? In order to analyze that, we need to talk about what do we know about the consequences, what don't we know, and what can't we know. And the two last ones on what don't we know and what can't we know, first of all, what don't we know is that there's no jurisdiction right now that has any such rules. So it's really hard to really see the actual repercussions in practice. And what can't we know, and that is an argument often used also in government when comparing between different countries, is that cultures are different. You know, people smoke differently in different rates. People eat more goulash in the Czech Republic than they do in Spain. People have different preferences based on what surrounds them. So even if we implement the rule in one country and it were to be successful, that doesn't necessarily mean anything for the local context somewhere else. However, there are still a few consequences that we can outline from what we know in other jurisdictions. All right, so the University of Basel looked at the effects of the increase of the age in which you can buy cigarettes in different cantons in Switzerland. So as different cantons were increasing the legal age to buy cigarettes from 16 to 18, it had virtually absolutely no effect because the 16-year-olds would just get their cigarettes from friends or elsewhere, or even on the illicit market, and we'll talk about the illicit market as well. So in Switzerland, we saw that it was within the realm of statistical irrelevance what the drop in smoking rates were when you increase the age to legally buy cigarettes from 16 to 18. Now, of course, you can say, why don't we make cigarettes illegal completely, right? I've had this question before. I mean, serious people, academics, who ask me, why don't we just ban all cigarettes, right? And I would scratch my head and say, well, I guess we also ban cannabis, and obviously nobody's using that anymore, right? I mean, it's a bit hard to understand how people approach this. Just because it's the law doesn't mean people stop doing it, and there's always a demand and people wanting to get their use of the thing that they prefer. But if you're wondering what would happen if you banned all cigarettes, there's a great example for you, because the country that tried that, this is Bhutan, great flag, by the way, but not so great policies. So Bhutan in 2020 was like, okay, COVID is raging. Religiously, the government was not a big fan of tobacco in the first place, and so what they said is that all sales of tobacco and all import of tobacco products completely illegal. Okay? So anyone want to guess how that worked out? Anyone, any clues? Because Bhutan lifted the ban about a year later because it was an absolute disaster. It spiked illegal trade. It was incredibly, actually the fact is that the government admitted that cigarette use increased during the ban on cigarettes. Now, why is that? Well, because the illicit gangs are much better at marketing a product which previously was only sold by the government, as it is in Hungary as well, by the way. If you're in Budapest and you go into a shop to buy cigarettes, only the government sells you cigarettes. Now, it turns out that dealers were much better at selling cigarettes to more people than the government. So what did the government do? The government lifted the ban and then said, okay, only us selling cigarettes, as it was before. And then they actually, for a brief amount of time, had to bring down the taxes on cigarettes to zero to make them as cheap as possible so that more people would be able to buy again from the government. So the government was essentially incentivizing people, to an extent even subsidizing people smoking, because the ban on smoking was such a disaster. South Africa tried the same. They actually banned both tobacco and alcohol during COVID. Again, absolute disaster. Illicit trade spiked. All the illegal, the gangs that were currently just selling drugs were now also selling cigarettes. Good business model. Your margins are incredible. If you've ever been to Paris, you go to Paris Gare du Nord, North Station. The moment you walk out of North Station, there's a few very friendly gentlemen, and they offer you cigarettes. About 3 to 4 euros a pack. The pack is about 10 euros in Paris if you buy it legally in a shop. And you know, there's really nobody who can do anything about it. There's so many dealers. It's readily available because cigarettes are so expensive in France and so highly regulated. This is what about 40 tons, this is not all of it, but Europol released some pictures. This is what about 40 tons of illegally traded cigarettes look like in practice. Here you have the little gentleman from Europol standing next to it for good measure. The illegal gangs, all the gangs that traffic in cigarettes, they make a lot of money off of this. And it's not only in the jurisdictions where cigarettes are not allowed. In our jurisdictions as well, illegal cigarettes are traded everywhere. Because, well, cigarettes are just simply too expensive for many people, and because of this quasi-prohibition. Because again, if you're on a low disposable income, you want to get your cigarettes anyway, and because cigarettes have an inelastic demand. So even if you increase cigarettes, the price of cigarettes doesn't mean necessarily people want to give up smoking. Actually, people are willing to give up on other needs in order to get to their use of tobacco anyway. They look quite professional. They're quite well organized when these gangs get busted. You can see this is a production where the cigarette pack is almost indistinguishable from the real one. As you can see, let's see if this works. These are all fake cigarettes. None of these are real. None of these brands exist. None of the tobacco is produced in any of the same fashion whatsoever. And yet, if you see this, you will say, well, this is a pack of Marlboro or whatever. I quite like as well that these smugglers were even wary of the local legislation, because in some countries in Europe you're not allowed to put the logo on it anymore, so some of these are plain packaged, and others for other jurisdictions actually still have the colors on it. They even print all the legal warnings on it too, so yeah, very conscious of them. So the French Union of Industrial Production, they made a report in 2016 where they looked at the illicit market and all the gangs that smuggle cigarettes, and what they found is that not only are these the regular gangs, because some of you in the audience might say, okay, what do I care, right? I mean, this is a dealer on the street, he sells cigarettes, he's not hurting anyone, he's just selling a pack of cigarettes, right? Well, actually, 20% of the revenues go to, and I told you at the beginning of the talk who we're going to talk about. All right, Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda makes money. So thanks, government, for making it very expensive. Who are we funding with that? So Al-Qaeda makes quite a bit of money with those revenues. The Irish Republican Army makes money off the illicit trade of cigarettes. And we got ISIS. ISIS as well was funded by illegal cigarettes. So if you buy a pack of the streets, guess who you were funding with that? So now you might say, okay, well, I don't care much about the foreign policy implications. If I'm buying a pack of cigarettes, well, I still have a pack of cigarettes, right? I mean, I get it off the street, you know, 3 euros instead of 10, you know, I saved quite a bit of money. Well, actually, these cigarettes inside are not the same cigarettes you're expecting. And of course, all cigarettes are bad for you, but these cigarettes that they're producing are even much worse for you. So the cadmium, which is essentially the ingredient in cigarettes that is bad for you, is about 3 times higher. In the UK, they even found 500% higher than in regular cigarettes. So these are produced sometimes with mouse feces, cement, hair. Everything is mixed into it to make it still look and smell like a cigarette, but you're actually smoking mouse shit. So not advisable if you ask me. So, knowing all this, why are we still pursuing this? Well, one of the answers is because the government is not very receptive to arguments, and unfortunately not to me. But there's also an organization that has been pursuing this for quite a while, the World Health Organization, thinks that we should bring smoking rates down to 0. They have World No Tobacco Day, and they keep telling you, quit or die. Well, they don't quite phrase it that way in their marketing materials, but they tell you need to just completely stop smoking from one day to another. They ignore, and we have done studies on this as well, where many smokers tell us that governments really they really underestimate how hard it is to quit smoking. For instance, if you go to a doctor today and you tell your doctor that you want to stop smoking, what they recommend to you is actually something that's government subsidized, which is nicotine replacement therapy. You can get some of these products in pharmacies or even grocery stores. Nicotine, gum, you have the patches. For most people, those actually just do not work. What does work, however, and the most effective cessation tool in nicotine is vaping, e-cigarettes. But the World Health Organization says e-cigarettes are harmful to health. Well, that is true. They do admit the fact that they're 95% less harmful than conventional cigarettes. Might have a bit of an addendum to that, but okay, it's the WHO. And what they keep arguing is that everything that produces smoke is bad for you, whether it's e-cigarettes or conventional cigarettes, and they ignore the scientific evidence on vaping, even though millions of people are stopping smoking and even eventually stopping all the consumption of nicotine through vaping. What is important to know as well is that nicotine doesn't cause cancer. It's all the compounds within the cigarettes that actually lead to lung cancer, lead to all the cardiac problems that you might perceive. Vaping does not. And vaping has been around for about 15 years, so obviously the long-term studies on 50 years we cannot have yet. But if it's any indication, if you compare vaping to cigarettes, the evidence is pretty clear that we should incentivize people to at least try stopping smoking through using vaping. Government doesn't want to do that. So how do we address the problem? Harm reduction, today we're talking a lot about different narcotics, and harm reduction applies to narcotics just as well as it does to nicotine consumption. Harm reduction is the principle of you wearing a helmet when you drive a motorcycle. Of course, you can also not drive a motorcycle. That's way safer. But if you want to drive a motorcycle, might as well do it with a helmet. So that's how we apply harm reduction. The same goes for driving a car. Sure, not driving a car won't get you in a car accident. But if you're driving a car, I recommend you to wear a seatbelt. Same goes for consumption of nicotine. If you're consuming nicotine, might as well do it in the least harmful way possible. And so, yes, you can go for snus, you can go for e-cigarettes. In order to achieve that, we need to allow for choices. This is a market that keeps developing. More choices keep coming on the market, and consumers want to have the availability of those choices if they go to a supermarket, where they go to a kiosk, wherever they get those products from. And now, what I think we should also do is have an impact assessment on taxation levels. Now, what does that mean? Right now, we keep increasing taxes on nicotine products, well, either to fund government services or to disincentivize people from smoking, but nobody ever looks at the effects that this has. We talked about the gangs. If you increase the price of cigarettes above a certain level, what you do is you push people towards the illicit market. Now, maybe the people in this room will never buy packs from a cigarette pack from a dealer, maybe because you're fortunate enough not to need that or because you don't smoke. However, a lot of people in our society live on very limited incomes, and they will do that, and we know they will, and they fund operations that are way worse, sometimes even worse than the government, as a result of that. So those are sort of my recommendations on that. I didn't want to make it too long to have the ability to also have some questions, but before I do that, take out your phones and please scan this. That's how I take away all your Bitcoin. No, sorry. Not doing that. It just leads you to our newsletter. If you want to know more about what we do on a regular basis at the Consumer Choice Center, you can just enter your email address. You get a regular email about once a month. We don't spam you. And it'd be good to have some people more in the loop, because this is not the only topic we talk about. We talk about all the things, mobility, how to make it easier for governments to facilitate easier mobility choices, a digital market. Why does my Netflix not work in Lithuania or the Czech Republic? Why can't I watch the same content? All of these different digital single market tools, mobility, environment, agriculture, we talk about a lot of issues, and it would be great to have you on board listening to us. So yeah, my name is Bill Wirtz, and thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bill, for your talk. Now we have time for some questions, so if anyone from the audience has some question, just raise your hand. We are here.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. Let's play the devil's advocate. Could you think of an example that goes against what you were saying at this point? Can you think of an example where some, law banning something or approach in this way actually helped?
Sure. So not only can I think of a reason, I hear the reasons all the time when I talk to policymakers about our view on these things. So policymakers do bring this up. Of course, it's a bit about sort of what is the equivalent, like how strong do you feel about a product? If I put the death sentence on parking at the wrong spot, I think actually what it produces is not people will park accordingly as a result of that, because there's this complete, there's no equivalent rule here. So obviously, it depends on how strong people feel about this. And if we put a death sentence on smoking, and some countries are not necessarily very far from doing that. There's in Singapore it's like $500 for you just putting a chewing gum on the ground. Then yes, obviously that could work. Now, first of all, liberal democracies have a tendency to try not to do that because it creates even worse repercussions. And on the other hand, what I talked about is sort of the elasticity of demand. So how much do people want this? It's a bit like the price of petrol. Right? You can increase the price of petrol considerably and people will still drive a car because they don't see another alternative. And often non-smokers underestimate how much smokers want nicotine. And that's not necessarily because they've developed a dependence, but it's also because they have a romantic traditional association with it, because they like it, because they want it just after food. There's people who smoke just 2 cigarettes a day. So people want this a lot. So yes, there are scenarios in which you could make it so prohibitively expensive. But I mean, just as with the drug war, a way in which you eliminate the complete illicit market is hard to imagine. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union have both tried it and didn't get rid of it. And those are some of the most authoritarian governments. I mean, China is a very authoritarian government, is completely unable to limit the illicit trade of cigarettes as well. So there's really no way in which you reduce demand unless you have a more educated population that maybe never stops smoking. So essentially the only way you could envision doing it is by people agreeing not to want to smoke anymore. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Why so many governments make the same mistakes?
In this example or in all the others? Because I think they do commit the same mistakes in all the other cases as well. Now, some governments seem to be impermeable to comparing themselves to other countries. This is always very strange to me. Sometimes a government implements a rule that absolutely failed somewhere else, and socialism is a good example, but then they still think, oh, this time it's different. Sometimes because of the cultural argument that I've made. So I think in the example of Bhutan, the government, for religious reasons, doesn't want you to consume any tobacco products. So they think, well, people are already on board, so this will work differently as it would, for instance, in Switzerland. So they talk themselves into sort of the argument for, culturally, which is different than some of the other countries. And then sometimes they overestimate the enforcement capacities that they have. I think that is true for any law. There's no law without enforcement. If you don't enforce a rule, it practically doesn't exist. In my country, voting is compulsory. I voted once in all the, and I could have voted maybe 5 or 6 times. Nobody's ever given me a fine, so it's not a law. And so governments have this tendency of overestimating. I mean, Italy has a law that all the lights need to be switched on a car all day, even when it's sunny out. But in practice, the police doesn't have the resources to really enforce these kind of rules because they don't want to keep stopping people from not having the lights on. So that's also why some governments think, oh, we will be successful with this because our police is so amazing. When actually the police is probably more occupied chasing genuine criminals than to try and find the shop that sells cigarettes under the counter. They have probably better things to do. Want to maybe follow up? You looked a bit skeptical there. You can follow up. Why do they think they're different? I don't know. Why do you think they're different?
I was more asking about the approach than the realization.
The approach. So why they think that the generation ban, for instance, would work?
Yes. Because you were talking more about the realization of the law, but I'm trying to understand that you're saying that the mistake is in the approach. right?
Right. Okay, I kind of see what you mean. So the generation law, I think, is also an approach that they take because they believe that if we create an entire generation that was never allowed to buy these products legally, they will just, in their mind, tobacco products will just not exist. Now, they have access to the internet and they see other people on the street, so I think they will catch on to that. Also, in my lifetime, none of the drugs were ever legal. They weren't even advertised on TV, and still, I've tried a few. So obviously, that doesn't, it's a very simplistic view that they take. It's like, okay, we'll just gradually introduce this, and you know, in 60, 70 years, nobody will be legally allowed to purchase it anymore. So to them, and I've heard this argument from policymakers, they don't even think this is prohibition. They think they are just like salami tactic phasing out the product, when actually what they are doing is prohibition, and it will have the exact same effects than all prohibition on other products. So,
yeah. Okay, that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Děkuju.
Hey, so we all know why the government keeps raising taxes on cigarettes because it is an increased load on the healthcare system, right? So while we have this free healthcare for citizens, in the European Union, like for example, it's not applied to me. I still pay the high price if I want to smoke, but I don't get access to the healthcare system. But like in general, so it's like we should approach this problem also. From the side from the root, right? So the root is that smokers increase the load on the healthcare system. So,
right.
But are there alternatives to just increasing prices? For example, some said, other schemes for solving that.
So maybe this is a job for Martin eventually. I don't know where Martin is, but some institutes in other countries have actually run the numbers. In the UK, they ran the numbers and they found that smokers actually considerably overpay for their healthcare costs through taxes. The smokers pay considerably more for their cigarettes, and the leftover money can be used for their healthcare considerably, also because smokers have a tendency of dying earlier, and that has an effect on the pension system as well. So that is one part of it. It's the more morbid approach to it. But on the other hand, on the healthcare example, I mean, as somebody who believes in the free market, to me it just means, sure, let's have a private healthcare system. Because when you go to a private life insurance company in the US, they ask you if you smoke cigarettes. Unfortunately, they still consider vaping equivalent of cigarettes, so they have some learning to do as well. But yeah, a private insurance company asks you if you smoke. And if you smoke, you'll end up paying more. To me, that's a fair system. That's actually a way in which cigarettes would be disincentivized on a private level because people, feel strongly about this. And by the way, some of these insurance companies, they do investigate you as well, in the same way as if you have fire insurance and you have a fire, and there's an investigator. Insurance companies in the US also do this, where they actually, sometimes send people, it's like, oh, is this guy smoking or not? And I think that's legit. Now, the government, of course, tries to have the same rate for everyone, and so obviously people who don't smoke feel unfairly treated because, well, the smokers need considerable health care, but that goes on the dime of everyone else. So I see the argument there, but for me it's just an argument, first of all, where the numbers need to be run in every country, and on the other hand, that would, for me, an argument mean that we should have differentiation, we should be individually treated from a healthcare perspective, and the government is unable to do that, so what we should have is a private approach to healthcare, yeah. Switzerland does that, by the way. I mean, to some extent, Switzerland doesn't have government healthcare. Neither does the Netherlands, by the way. So it's not just the US or some overseas, I don't know what. It's even countries in Europe already practice models of private healthcare. So. All right, nobody else, so thank you very much. Appreciate it.